here, committee members, staff, and conferees. Today we're going to finish up the state hospital recommendations, and then we're going to start the Department of Children and Families budget. So with that, committee, are there any recommendations for the state hospitals?
I don't remember, and I was looking at K&I, and I didn't take my folder home, and I meant to. They didn't request anything additional, am I correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
I didn't see anything that they really wanted.
There are quite a bit of wages in there.
Right.
Through
22.
last year through ARP in 2022, and then also through the 24/7 playpen.
Well, if that's the case, seeing that, I would,
Sure.
shall I recommend that we approve the budget as presented by the governor.
And Parsons, the two.
Yeah, K&I and Parsons.
And Mr. Chairman, I'll second.
I have a second. Committee discussion. The only thing I might add is just FYI, we've struggled with these wages, and this year, well, from 17 until now, we've put, in SGF, we put $10 million in wages in the hospitals. And this year, in 2022, we're projected to put in about 9.6 million. And then in the next
23.
deal here, in 23, we're talking about $24 million. So this should bring things up pretty well. Representative Ballard.
I would agree, it should. One of the questions I realized yesterday when I was thinking about this budget we didn't ask was overtime, because remember, we had a real problem with overtime at all of our hospitals, from Osawatomie to all of them. And I think he came close to it when he talked about absenteeism and who was working and because of COVID and everything else. But I think these figures would cover the overtime, especially if they are short in workforce along those lines. What we didn't want that we had before is that they were way over in hours, which means that a person could be working 18 hours or whatever, and that's something we did not want. And they eliminated that problem, because I don't think you can take care of anybody when you're that tired and everything else. So I think the wages will cover, hopefully, any of that if that should occur again.
Representative Howerton.
I think part of that discussion needs to be held with the nursing agencies overcharging as well, because they're having to pay those high rates.
Sure. And
So I don't know, I mean, it is what it is, I guess, right now, but that would probably change to save the state some money.
yeah, that's a big can of worms to open. We've had that. Well, I think we heard testimony last week. They could hire 5 people for every 1 nurse. So, well, we know it's a problem. It's just how to address that. It's very difficult. And one of my concerns about that is just the fact that if we pass some kind of a law restricting that we may actually run these nurses to another state that surrounds us. So it's, if you make another $100 an hour in Oklahoma, I'm just saying that it's kind of up here, you try to do no harm. And that's kind of where that comes from too. So that's kind of some of the hesitancy about trying to, pass our law out of this problem. So anyway, very good. Committee, further discussion. Representative Reeves. Yeah, we did that last week. These are just recommendations left over from Thursday. Okay, seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Very good. That completes the recommendations for the two hospitals. And so now we'll open up the hearing for Department of Children and Family. And Charday is going to start us off. So a committee, if you've got your computers, Francie is out to a funeral today. And then the version that she sent you Friday was updated. And so Charday just sent out another deal updating for the slides. So if you have your computer, it'll be right on the top right there. I see mine. So you can follow along with that. Charday's going to be working off of the budget here, this year.
Is this on already? Oh, it's on.
Okay, very good.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Charday Kane, and I will be presenting the Department for Children and Families budget. For fiscal year 2022, I'm going to start on page 1056 in your packet. The 2021 legislature approved $770.6 million, including $346.7 million SGF for the Department for Children and Families. They subsequently had an SGF reappropriation of $18.9 million. $10 million will be used for foster care, $3.3 million to expand Families First Prevention Services Program, and $1.3 million will be used for the Comprehensive Child Welfare Information System project. With the $18.9 million reappropriated funds, they have a starting point, if you will, of $789.5 million, including $365.6 million SGF. In the middle of the page, you'll see the agency estimate. The agency requests fiscal year 2022 expenditures of $1.1 billion, including $365.1 million SGF. This is an all funds increase of $335.1 million, or 42.4% above the amount approved by the 2021 legislature. As you can see, most of that is related to federal funds. The child care stabilization grants totaling $106.9 million will be used to assist child care providers with salaries and wages, rent, utilities, or other necessities to stabilize their businesses. The child care quality grants will also be for child care providers, and that is an additional $152.9 million. The agency also received an additional $54.8 million for the Low-Income Energy Assistance Program, which assists more low-income families with energy bills and weatherization projects. On the top of page 1057, for independent living, the agency received $5 million from federal pandemic funds. Additionally, the agency was awarded $250,000 in federal funds for the We Can Drive program for independent living youth. And all other adjustments for fiscal year 2022 include an increase of $5 million in SNAP funding, $7 million in prevention services grants, and about $4 million in low-income water assistance program. The governor's recommendation includes $1.1 billion, including $365.1 million SGF in fiscal year 2022, which is a decrease of $18.4 million, including $17 million SGF. This is all attributable to Human Services consensus caseloads, and that is related to the $10 million in reappropriated SGF monies that went to foster care, as well as a part of their reduced resource package that they submitted, having $2.3 million all funds, including $2.1 million SGF, in maintaining the case management provider rates at FY 2021 levels. And I'm happy to stand for questions for fiscal year 2022.
Committee questions on 2022. It's a lot of federal money, huh? Very good. Continue on to 23.
Fiscal year 2023 can be found on 1059. The agency requests 1.1 billion, including 365.1 million SGF for fiscal year 2022. Again, for fiscal year 2023, they requested 979.3 million, including 371.0 million SGF. First, I'll go over their enhancements. So just so that everyone can know how I laid out this table, the top is their 11 enhancement requests, and at the bottom, the governor's recommendation. If she recommended it, then you will not see it in the table because it's already in the agency's request. If she did not recommend it, then you will see a reduction of those funds at the bottom portion. The first enhancement is for Families First Prevention Services SGF only grants. These are grants that did not end up meeting qualifying criteria through the California Evidence-Based Clearinghouse for Child Welfare. So that was a request of 2.8 million. The governor recommends partially funding this enhancement request in the amount of 1.4 million. And you can see that partial for number 14 on the table. Request number 2, the enhancement is protection specialist salary increases. The agency indicates high caseloads, responsibility for decision-making and paperwork requirements, leading to difficulty hiring and keeping qualified staff. This enhancement will raise protection specialist salaries by up to 12.5%, not to exceed the market rate. However, all positions will receive a minimum 2.5% increase. The governor did recommend this adoption of this request. Request number 3, Kansas Management Information System replacement. This system is used to track client services, complete and submit federal and state reports, control service and spending limits, and pay for vocational rehabilitation services. The agency indicates KMIS was developed and implemented in the 1980s and is having a hard time meeting the data collection and reporting requirements with the WIOA, or Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act requirements. The governor did recommend adoption of this request, and this was 3.5 million. Enhancement number 4 is related to the Amazon Connect Virtual Contact Center. During the state lockdown, the state of Kansas worked with Accenture to establish this contact center and help establish working remotely and solidifying continuity of operations. This is a 4-year contract, and the governor did recommend adoption of this request of 1.9 million. Enhancement 5 is additional pre-employment transition services. It's an early intervention that provides students with disabilities ages 14 through 21 with job exploration, counseling, and other services to help prepare for employment and maximize self-sufficiency. This enhancement would add 10 pre-ETS or pre-employment transition services specialist positions and 2 manager positions to expand this early intervention. The governor does not recommend adoption of this request, and you can see that on number 15. Enhancement Communication Access Services, number 6, would add 2 FTE positions within the Kansas Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing to serve as a central point of contact for participating state agencies. The governor does not recommend adoption of this request, and you can see that on number 16. Request number 7 is regarding independent living subsidy for foster youth. This enhancement supports increasing the monthly assistance subsidy for adults ages 18 to 20 who have exited foster care to 130% of federal poverty levels, the same level used to qualify for food assistance for 21 and up. The governor partially recommended this in the amount of 756,000 SGF, and you can see that on number 17. The request number 8 is related to high-quality legal representation, so funding a pilot program to support parents who have received a report and are getting an assessment or an investigation completed by DCF. And the governor did not recommend adoption of this request. That's number 18 on the governor's recommendation list. Request number 9, enhancement for Families First Prevention Services, would allow DCF to expand the program and provide additional prevention services. There are currently counties with waiting lists for families to receive services and some counties that do not have any available services. This is $7 million, and the governor recommends adoption of this request. Request number 10 is related to practicum supervisors. So students in child welfare practicum internships are currently overseen by protection supervisors. This would add 6 supervisor positions to manage the student interns and be used as a workforce development strategy for DCF to attract new employees. The governor did not recommend adoption of this request, and you can see that on number 19. And the last enhancement was related to capital improvements. The agency requested $850,000 for renovation of the first floor lobby and interview rooms at the Topeka Service Center. The request includes updating interior finishes and furniture, increasing security in interview rooms, upgrading technology, and other renovations. The governor recommends partially funding this enhancement request in the amount of $450,000 from the Project Maintenance Reserve Fund, which is number 20, and the Joint Committee on State Building Construction did approve the governor's recommendation for fiscal year 2022 and 2023. All of the other adjustments for the governor's for the agency include a decrease of mostly one-time funding, low-income energy assistance program, childcare quality grants were one time, and the independent living was one time. Additionally, the child support services program had some one-time costs because of their new contracts that you heard about a couple weeks ago. So those will not carry over into fiscal year 2023. And there were also decreases from human services consensus caseloads for fiscal year 2023 as well. So go back to my page. The governor's recommendation is $972.5 million, including $367.3 million SGF for fiscal year 2023. And I'm happy to stand for questions.
Committee questions? Representative Helmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I read the number 7 enhancement, and it takes them, this enhancement supports increasing the monthly assistance subsidy for adults ages 16 or 18 to 20 who have exited foster care to 130% of federal poverty levels, the same level used to qualify for food assistance. The agency requests $1.5 million. I don't understand why we're going over that, and that's an awful lot of money. Maybe that's a statement, but
Mr. Chair, would you like me to give some more information?
Yes.
I'm not sure what the current level is. I can check with the agency and ask them, but for 18 to 20 right now, it's under what the 21 and up group will receive. So they're receiving the 100, or those who are at the 130 level are receiving funding, whereas if you're not at 130, you're not receiving that funding. So there's a breakdown of who can receive the funding. It's not equitable, essentially. And the governor recommended $756,000, so not the full $1.5 million.
okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Any further questions? Well, it's pared down to under $1 billion, so. Representative Howard.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that we contract, DCF contracts with agencies that handle foster care and things like that, is that in this budget or is that a different budget? Like St. Francis and things like that, so
Yes, that is in this budget. There,
where would that be?
that's in the Prevention and Protection Services Program. However, it's also in the Human Services caseload numbers that you see on the agency and governor's estimates.
Okay, so what agencies do we use besides, are there several?
There are 4 different organizations that we use.
Are they listed in this budget?
I do not believe they're listed in here, but I can get them to you.
Okay. And then, so all of their caseloads are just combined into one number?
Yes.
So DCF numbers, and then, does DCF have their own caseload on top of, or is it all contracted out to these 4 agencies?
To my understanding, it is all contracted out to these 4 agencies.
Thank you.
Representative Howerton, that'd be a good question for the agency. Yeah. Sure. Any further questions? Okay, very good. Thank you, Sharday. All right, next we have Secretary Howard. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm glad to be here. Laura Howard, the Secretary for DCF. And thanks to Sharday for going over the budget proposal. I'm pleased to talk with you from an agency perspective about our priorities and initiatives. Trying to get organized here. Too many pieces of paper in front of me. You should have the slide presentation from the agency, but I'll talk with you today about our 22 and 23 budgets. I'll also try to give you some updates on some key initiatives. We'll talk about caseloads and that caseload question that we just talked about, as well as just some successes we'd like to share with you as a committee. You know, our mission as an agency is to protect children, strengthen families, and support adult self-sufficiency. And we do that, you can see on slide 5, through a few major program areas. And I'll just mention briefly what those are on this slide and the slides that follow. So economic and employment services, prevention and protection services, rehabilitation services, child support services. Those are our 4 main program areas. And then how we deliver those services, we have a delivery system through our regional offices that's tied particularly to the economic and employment services programs as well as others, and obviously then some administration. But economic and employment services, when you think about the benefit programs that people receive, when people come to our offices in need or call on that Amazon Connect phone line and need supports and services, those could be individuals who qualify for cash assistance through our TANF program. They might qualify for food assistance through SNAP or Childcare, perhaps utility assistance through the LEAP program during the winter time. Also, through these programs, we do a lot of employment assistance for individuals who are qualified to receive child care or food assistance or cash assistance in terms of assisting those individuals in getting the skills needed to gain employment. So that's really our economic and employment services. These are services that we really provide in terms of the eligibility determination. We do that through our regional offices, and I'll show you a map of those in just a minute. The second major program, and the one we probably talk the most about with DCF, is prevention and protection services, which really encompasses our child welfare services and our adult protective services. So the protection side, our Protection Report Center, where we have the child abuse hotline, adult hotline, the investigations that come out of that. Family support, family preservation, families first, those front-end prevention services, the contracted foster care services, as well as the independent living services for older youth. We also license the foster homes in the state. We're also the licensing agency. The third major program, after our economic programs and our prevention and protection programs, are rehabilitation services. We don't talk very much about this, but these are really critical programs for individuals with disabilities in order to gain employment. So this is our vocational rehabilitation services, which provides services for individuals who perhaps they've had an injury that's left them disabled. Perhaps something has happened during the course of their life that means they now have a disability. Or perhaps they've had a disability and they want to go to work. So we provide vocational rehabilitation services to those individuals, also independent living services to them. We also serve Kansans who are blind or visually impaired through some targeted programs. And then the last thing with regard to rehabilitation services is we're the agent for the Social Security Administration in conducting the disability determination services in the state. And that last piece is 100% federally funded. We do that as an agent of the Social Security Administration. And the others are very high federal match, about 78% federal dollars, about 22% state dollars. The fourth primary area that we have as an agency, and you've already had some testimony on this from our interim child support director, Kay Long, this year, is child support services in terms of helping children receive the financial support necessary for their growth and development. Establishing parentage and orders for child support, locating non-custodial parents, enforcing those orders, modifying those orders. And you've heard a bit about those contracts, and I'll mention those a bit later in this presentation as well. On slide 10, I referenced earlier that we have a series of regional offices across the state. From a service delivery perspective, in terms of those services that we provide directly, we've divided the state into 6 regions, and we have 36 service centers across those regions. So on the map on page 10, those counties that kind of have a star or an asterisk in those counties are areas where there is currently a DCF service center where individuals can come in, receive services in person. For those who might be newer to the committee, it's not been that many years ago where there were SRS service centers in every county in the state. That was mandated by statute. Those began to be reduced in the 90s and were gradually reduced over time down to the 36 service centers that exist today. Slide 11 just references the various functions that you'll see in the administration part of the budget. Obviously, things like IT, audits, personnel services, legal, the general executive kinds of administrative functions, grants and contracts, things like that. On page 12, I thought it was really important that we could lay out, just kind of on one table for you, the variety of federal pandemic funds that we as an agency have received, primarily directly, as opposed to, say, through like a Spark process. Most of this funding has come directly to DCF through our federal partners, and it's come out of a variety of different federal acts, beginning back in 2020 with the CARES Act, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, the CRRSA, which was the Appropriations Act in late 2021, the Coronavirus Response and Relief Act, and then most recently through ARPA. But as you noticed in Charday's presentation, a lot of federal funds have come directly to DCF in response to the pandemic. If you look at this table, the DCF budget has been boosted by about $330 million in the current year. It'll be about $184 million in fiscal year 23. But if you look at the second column on the table for the awards, of that total of $570 million, if you look down 4 or 5 lines, you'll see 2 childcare amounts that themselves add up to about $460 million. So the bulk of the resources that we've received as an agency have been in the realm of childcare. And as was talked about, those have been and are being used in a variety of different ways related to stabilizing the childcare system, stabilization grants to providers, expansion of eligibility through our Hero Relief Program early in the pandemic, a variety of facets related to quality. I mean, we've been working closely with other agencies and the Children's Cabinet, in really planning for the best use of those dollars. You'll see some other fairly high amounts as well. The second item, the low-income energy assistance, this is the annual program that provides funding for individuals to access support, usually for winter heating. Additional funding was put into that program during the pandemic, so we received additional funding to distribute through the LEAP program, and also a new program to administer related to water assistance that's just now kicking off. That's about $9 million. And that's really a one-time program as we know it today, but it really will allow us to help folks who might be experiencing water disconnects. There's other pieces within here that cut across all of our programs, but those are the largest ones. Primarily, again, that child care area, some things around utilities. What doesn't show up on this chart, but has been significant in Kansas, and you only see on this chart through what shows up as SNAP administration, is the added funding that's come in on the food assistance side, in a number of different ways. We administered what was called the pandemic EBT program. When schools were shut down, there weren't school lunches. The federal government pushed resources out there for us to be able to get the equivalent of SNAP resources out to those families whose youth weren't in school. There's been about 3 rounds of that since the pandemic. And then also the federal agency also increased SNAP benefit amounts by about 15%. So we're talking, a lot of additional food resources out to Kansas families. Those don't show up in our budget, the actual expenditure of SNAP dollars, but I'll show you that on a slide, in a few slides. I'll show you that on a caseload slide where you can see how that couple of $100 million, what that impact is on the Kansas economy. I think my point in all this is particularly on the benefit side, when I talk about my economic and employment services staff, they have been busy since the start of this pandemic, not just with the normal kinds of added demands you would see when people are struggling with employment, but with a number of new federal programs or additions to federal programs. So they have been very busy meeting the needs of Kansans during the course of the pandemic. Starting on slide 13, we get into a bit of a budget summary. And again, on these slides, which we put in every year, we also felt like it was important to call out the pandemic funds because they kind of skew the spending levels a bit. So if you look at the total budget summary for 2022 from all funding sources, in that first line, you see that's an increase of more than $350 million. But if you look at the bottom line on the page, $300 million of that change was from federal pandemic funds coming into the state. So again, in fiscal year 22, in the current year, the addition of those federal funds means that federal funding is making up 2/3 of the DCF budget, as the pie chart would show you. General fund about 30%. The next page shows you expenditures by program. The dark blue, again, are regular expenditures. The light blue are the pandemic expenditures. I was just talking about all of those resources that have touched the economic and employment services side of our agency. You can see that on that top line. Typically, prevention and protection services is by far our largest program. Over the course of 2022, you can see the impact of those added resources and what that's meant on the economic and employment services side. Slide 15 takes out those federal dollars and just kind of shows you our current year budget from a state general fund perspective, those state tax dollars. And that looks a little bit more typical for DCF, where prevention and protection services is by far the largest single program. Our foster care adoption prevention services, those pieces, followed by service delivery through our regions, and then you can see some smaller amounts across the other programs. And then slide 16, just to kind of bring that point home, it just shows the federal funds in the current year. And again, the regular federal funds are in dark blue, the pandemic funds are in light blue. Again, that first line of childcare, what would have been maybe $80 million ballooning out to $340 million in the current year. So again, just gives you a snapshot of, I think, really what we've been managing with and to in meeting the needs of Kansans and service providers during these last 2 years. I'll skip on then to page 18 is our FTE positions in fiscal year 2020. You will see an increase in positions show up in our base budget. Those positions are essentially positions funded through federal relief dollars. We added 60 positions in our regional offices to absorb some of that added demand and those added caseloads coming to us through that work. The emergency, the EBT, pandemic food assistance for kids that I talked about earlier, the energy assistance, a special TANF emergency assistance program, and those positions will go away when that federal funding goes away. This was really just to ensure that we could continue to be timely and not have backlogs when people were coming to us for assistance. The same is really true if you look at within the most of the other areas. I would call out that 34 of those positions that show up in administration are some positions we thought we were going to need to hire related to the pandemic. We did not need to do so. Those are unfunded. Those FTEs will also go away from our budget. And then we also did receive some funding through the federal SNAP program to add some staff within the employment and training program to assist individuals with accessing job skills and employment, 100% federally funded. So as we look at the changes in positions, those are really federally funded, either pandemic or other targeted pieces. In terms of the current year budget changes, we had no supplemental requests and no supplementals recommended by the governor in the current year. So all of the changes related to our caseloads, which includes TANF and foster care. And Sharday did a good job talking about this. Within the foster care program, we did have a reduction in the number of children budgeted within the foster care. The $10 million that had been reappropriated from the prior year was also swept in those consensus caseloads. And then we also had some savings related to the enhanced FMAP as it plays out across the foster care program. So you'll see those reductions in the current year. 23 has, I think, a lot more things to talk about in terms of new dollars and new state funding. So as we look at the 23 budget summary, I think the first thing I would show you is that very line where in terms of all funding sources, our budget would reduce from $1.1 billion to $988 million in 2023. But again, that's because of the reduction of that increase in those federal pandemic dollars. And you can see that at the bottom of the chart. There's actually an increase from fiscal year 22 to 23 from state general fund dollars of just over $19 million. And that's the primary pieces we'll talk to you about today. The federal funding share of our budget declines to 60% in fiscal year 23. I had talked a few minutes ago how it was up to 2/3 of the budget in fiscal year 22 with those added pandemic funds. I won't belabor the next charts. They're really the same ones you saw for fiscal year 22, except you'll see that the federal dollars don't have as much of an impact in terms of the slides as we look at fiscal year 23, as those numbers, except for childcare, begin to wind down. We'll still have quite a bit of additional childcare dollars to expand in fiscal year 23. But again, the slides look the same. They're laid out the same way for your information. Then on page 25, in terms of positions, no change in the number of positions in our budget in fiscal year 23. That really takes me then to the budget additions in fiscal year 23. The governor recommended all funds enhancements of $18.6 million, $10.9 million from the state general fund. And then you can see our consensus caseload numbers as well that Sharday talked about that show up here for a net of a $16.8 million all funds increase and $11.9 million SGF increase. And I would like to just talk briefly about those enhancements, and I'll try not to repeat things that Sharday talked about, but I think there's a couple things that I just want to make sure that you're aware of. The first enhancement the governor funded has to do with Families First. And there's two enhancements in here that relate to Families First. One relates to providing some additional state general fund dollars for grants that haven't qualified to be on the federal evidence-based clearinghouse. The second enhancement we'll talk about is what I think of as a true enhancement, where the governor's adding significant new dollars to Families First. I would remind all of you that when Families First started a couple of years ago, we were an early adopter state, and I have to thank the legislature for providing resources, passing needed legislation. We jumped on board and started that program the very first day. The way Families First was structured federally, one of the jobs of the federal agency was to create a clearinghouse and to indicate what programs met certain evidence criteria to qualify for 50% federal funding. They were pretty slow out of the gate with that. There weren't very many programs when we started, so we had to make some judgments and choices as to what to fund in our grants to providers, not knowing for sure if certain programs would get on that clearinghouse. So we have some existing programs and existing grants that did not meet the standards to be on that clearinghouse or have not yet been reviewed. So we're having to pay 100% general fund for those. What I would say to you is, although they may not qualify for the federal clearinghouse or they may not qualify yet, our own review and external evaluation done by KU shows that those programs are very effective. This includes things like the ABC program that we've talked a lot about in Kansas in terms of that attachment program that was originally a pilot program several years ago, funded through the United Methodist Health Ministries Fund. We know that 91% of the kids in that program are still at home after 12 months. So it's meeting the standards. So we have 4 or 5 programs that are like that. They're meeting the standards. They're performing well. So we want to continue those programs because they're working, even though they're not on the federal clearinghouse. The second enhancement related to Families First is on page 28, and that's an actual increase in the program of $7 million all funds, $3.5 million SGF. This would expand Families First by about 50%. As you know, the focus of Families First was to really refocus child welfare services across the country to promote services at the front end that keep those children most at risk of out-of-home placement with their families. We know that this has been effective. We can see that in our own numbers in foster care. We can see that in the number of youth diverted from care and the fact that 89% of the youth referred to Family First in Kansas have not come into care after 12 months. So this would add $7 million to expand that. We currently have waiting lists for some of our services across the state. Some of the mental health services have had waiting lists. Multisystemic therapy, Seeking Safety, which is a very effective program, has waiting lists in some areas across the state. And we also know when we did the request for proposal in the first place, the applications we had greatly exceeded the available funds. So we would ask you to support this expansion of a program where we have clear evaluation data to show its success, and we can clearly see the impact as we look at our foster care system. Page 29, Sharday talked about the protection specialist salary increases, increases of up to 12.5%, not to exceed the market rate. You know, from June 2020 to June of 2021, our turnover rate for protection specialists in DCF was 38.3%. Our other frontline staff were in the mid-20s, so higher than that. This increase would cover about 630 staff within DCF. Everything from protection supervisors to protection specialists, social worker specialists. Again, targeted on those protective services workers doing those front-end investigations. Page 30, and I think this may get a little bit to the question that Representative Helmer was asking earlier. We did make a request within our budget to increase the subsidy that we provide to youth who have aged out of foster care, an independent living subsidy. Prior to January of 2021, the maximum monthly subsidy that we provided to youth who'd aged out of foster care was $350. You know, and the goal of it is really to help a youth meet their basic expenses. During the pandemic, we received federal what's called CHAFE, which is the Federal Independent Living Act. We received federal CHAFE funds that allowed us to increase that amount to $700 a month. In January of 2021. What the governor's recommendation would do is to maintain that level at $700. We had initially asked for more than that. I think we had asked for about $1,400, which was about the 75th percentile of what youth told us their expenses were. I think this is a reasonable amount in the sense of not paying all the costs, but recognizing that there's a lot of costs towards basic living. And again, these are the youth who've aged out without having a permanent guardian, without having gone home, without being adopted. In order to receive this, they have to be actively working on their self-sufficiency plan. They have to be in school. They have to be employed or getting job skills training. And it does have an income part where based on their income, they may not qualify for the whole amount. So again, what this enhancement would do is allow us to keep it at the $700 that it's been at since January of 2021. Item 31, the KMIS replacement. Sharday did a good job of talking about that. I was reading the budget again the other day, and I didn't even recognize the name of the programming language and the database that this system is. But this is the system used by Rehabilitation Services, and this would replace it with an automated case management system. This is funded almost 80% from the federal government, so this is really a one-time SGF cost needed for only 1 year. Sharday also talked about the Amazon Connect virtual contact center. One comment I would make about that is this did, of course, allow DCF staff to be able to work remotely and to continue services during the pandemic. But the piece that makes it so valuable to continue is the way in which it's enhanced customer service. It's given customers far more ways to contact DCF and actually be able to receive those services, get the information they need. It has a lot of capabilities that our hardwired phone system didn't have. It can transcribe calls. It can allow staff to work like in multiple queues at the same time across programs or across parts of the state to process applications. So it's operationally, I think, led us to be far more efficient, as well as having the ability to allow people to work outside of their regular office building. So again, lots and lots of opportunities for, again, better customer channels and customer service. The last enhancement Sharday talked about as well, just some capital improvements fund that come from a reserve fund within our lease for our Topeka Service Center. This is the office in Topeka that customers enter into, and it just allows some renovation of the first floor lobby and some interview rooms at that service center. The next part of my presentation just talks a bit about caseload. I won't go through each of these lines, but on page 34, I would call out in the middle of the page when it says, when you see SNAP food assistance, you don't see these dollars in our budget. These are off-budget dollars. They're 100% federal funds. But if you look across, $290 million in fiscal year 20, almost $480 million in fiscal year 2021. Those are, again, those added federal dollars during the pandemic. This was the funding for the school children who weren't in school through the pandemic EBT program. This was the additions to the SNAP benefit amounts that the federal agency instituted 15% increases. You'll continue to see part of that increase in fiscal year 2022 before I think we get down to kind of those more normal levels and those added programs go away. But you think about from 2020 to 2021, that's almost $200 million into the Kansas economy related to the ability to purchase food. So I wanted to call that out because that doesn't really show up on the budget per se. You know, in addition to these 2 pages, we do have a few charts related to some of the caseloads, and it might be easier to look at some of those. On page 37, you'll see the foster care caseload. And so this is what Sharday was talking about that shows up within consensus caseload. We have 4 case management providers, KVC, St. Francis, Cornerstones of Care, and TFI. St. Francis and KVC would be the largest 2. Cornerstones would be the smallest, and TFI would be next to the smallest, just in terms of the proportion of the caseload that they serve. What you can see from this chart, you know, the line really shows you the caseload. And, you know, in the consensus caseload, you can see the reduction in monthly youth in care. And I would actually call out, they were actually below these estimates at this point. As of the end of January, we had 6,498 youth in care, so under 6,500. Which we've not been at that place since early in fiscal year 2016. So it's been a long time since foster care numbers have been this low. And again, I credit that to a lot of things. An awful lot I credit to the Family First program. The cash assistance program, TANF, you know, except for a small bump up during the pandemic. You'll see a small bump up, and if you look at those first columns of monthly persons or look a little bit at that line, you'll see a little bit of an increase happening in fiscal year 20, but then we continue to project it will continue to decline. Childcare assistance. You'll see a fairly steady increase starting in fiscal year 19. Again, a part of this has to do with the changes during the pandemic, the Hero Relief Program, the expansion of the income eligibility under that program. And so again, you can see those numbers there. We're estimating just around 12,000 average monthly children in the current year and about 12,600 in fiscal year 2023 on the child care assistance side. And on page 40, it's just one more way of kind of showing you the level of resources coming into child care. Fiscal year 2020, about $105 million. And then those 2 major pots of money coming in, you see coming in 2021, actually will be spent out over the next few years, but raising that to about $500 million in 1 year. So again, by far, the largest impact from the pandemic for the agency that I lead. Now, page 41, 42 gives some of the performance-based budgeting elements for DCF. I think my CFO did a good job walking through those with you all a few weeks ago, so I won't take the time to do that today unless you have questions about those. Again, we identified just some of those key indicators within each of our programs. I wanted to talk about a handful of success stories today. The first is Family First. Can never talk about that too often from my perspective. It's just been so successful. And again, I'm so grateful for the legislature for believing in it, for allowing us to be one of the first 3 or 4 states to implement that when there are states that still have not moved forward on it. And just at the highest level, at this point, 89% of children and youth who've reached 12 months from the time of referral have remained at home. So we're very close to it. In any given month, it might be 89, it might be 90, but our latest data would show 89%. And for 2 categories, it's clearly been high. Kinship navigation at 100%, all of the mental health program at 90%. And I think that's really relevant on the mental health side. A number of those programs, family functional therapy, multisystemic therapy, a number of those are really targeted towards some of those older youth, some of those behavioral challenges in the home, and the fact that those have been so successful in allowing those youth to remain at home. The second thing I always like to talk about related to our prevention and protection services is what we call our Kansas practice model. And my prevention and protection services team worked really hard over a 2.5 year period to really put some structure and models into place for how we approach our work. Everything from how assessments are done at the front end to how families are engaged. And so there's a lot of different elements of that. One of those is team decision making, which is a model we've rolled out across the state, which ensures that when there's a decision to be made about whether a child needs to leave the home, that the child's family is there, the child is there, people who are important to the child are there, and it really is a facilitated meeting that asks the question, what does it take to keep this child safe? And it's a very successful evidence-based model. Casey Family Programs and some of their partners have helped us roll that out across the state. We've recently expanded that to include circumstances where there may be where there may be the risk of a move or a disruption of a foster placement. So again, that's one of those. We have several different models that we put in place. And again, I think this also has had a significant impact on the drop in the need for foster care. This slide is already out of date. As I said earlier, the state currently has 6,498 youth in care. We started at the beginning of the Kelly administration with 7,600. So 15% fewer youth entered care in 2019, 11% fewer entered care in 2020. If I was doing a child welfare presentation, you'd hear me say our focus now is how long kids are staying in care, and that there's just some parts of the state where we see youth staying in care too long, and we've got some projects going on with the courts to address that. Childcare on page 45, as I said earlier, lots and lots of initiatives in childcare as part of the federal pandemic funding and the Hero Relief Program. Serving essential workers, increase the income limit to qualify for childcare, waive the family share deduction, increased rates to providers, first just for infants, and then in April it will raise for the population as a whole from the 65th percentile of market rates to the 85th percentile. And again, that still won't be at market rates. There'll still be a disadvantage if you're relying on a subsidy, but certainly the ability to increase the quality childcare availability. One of the things I'm most proud of that we've done during the course of the pandemic is the support to the childcare providers. When you think about vulnerable businesses, right, all of the lots of vulnerable businesses across a lot of sectors, we had the ability through the funding that I've talked to you about today to provide funding to providers, what we've called sustainability grants. They're small dollar amounts for a given provider. It might be $2,000, but it's what makes the difference for them to be able to support their operations, stay in business. And so we've had 2 phases of sustainability grants. We'll be announcing the 3rd phase of sustainability grants at the beginning of March. There's other initiatives that we continue to talk about related to those resources, including how to complement startup funds that might be available potentially through the Spark process for starting childcare businesses and additional workforce supports. I think on page 46 just talks about all the work that we do in DCF related to employment. I think people aren't always aware of that, that TANF cash assistance participants engage in work programs. They have to participate 20 to 30 hours per week to get assistance. Our goals program that piloted in 2016 to 2018, we expanded it statewide in 2019. It's a voluntary program for food assistance clients. It's been incredibly successful in helping folks gain employment. You know, we've had a couple of really great partnerships. For example, the USDA, Department of Agriculture, you know, they call us now when they want to hire people to be meat inspectors or things like that. They'll do special recruiting fairs, and we'll make sure that our SNAP recipients are part of those applicants. So we've had some really great programs that get people into meaningful jobs and good wages, which is so important. I talked about vocational rehabilitation. Pre-ETS is also part of vocational rehabilitation. That's really helping those youth with disabilities as they're getting ready to graduate from high school. Page 47, again, I won't spend time here because you had a whole presentation on this, but as of October, we did make changes within our privatized child support system. The two contractors are Maximus and Young Williams. You heard about the things we were trying to do around the call center and client support, and the additional outcome measures that were added to those contracts. Page 48, the child welfare class action lawsuit that we talked to last year about reaching a settlement agreement on. We have been busy under the terms of that settlement, not just, seeking to meet those practice improvements and outcomes that we've committed to reach, which are good for kids because they're about stability and mental health supports, but also some other facets. We've stood up a foster accountability advisory board that has a lot of people with lived experience on that board. We also have our mediator from the Center for the Study of Social Policy, our neutral, who will be validating our data. And they will be reviewing the first practice improvement information in March. And so the first public report from the settlement should actually come out this summer. Page 49. We're pretty excited this session about some of the things coming out of the legislative work this summer, and we look forward to seeing some progress on a couple of bills. One, which is an expansion of Adrian's Law to require a visual pediatric exam in certain circumstances, a person who has specialized training in that regard, and also some things around clarifying the information sharing between DCF and law enforcement. The last thing I would just mention, because you would probably ask me about it if I didn't mention it, because it doesn't show up in our budget this year. For each of the last 2 or 3 years, you've been very generous in supporting enhancement requests for our comprehensive child welfare information system. You know, this is the effort that we're undergoing to modernize our child welfare information systems, as well as developing interfaces across agencies. We've got 5 different legacy systems of different ages, different capabilities, aging mainframe technology, unsupported operating systems, all those things you hear, obsolete programming languages. You added funding over a 3-year period for planning and design, with the understanding that probably about $100 million will be needed for the development phase. We did not need to request any funding this year because we have sufficient funding still from the planning and development phase. Based on just how the timing of that has played out, we carried forward about $4 million will go towards the 23 budget. We have been approved by our federal partners for 50-50 match. We held vendor demonstrations in January, and we plan to issue an RFP later this year. So again, we expect the development start date to be closer to fiscal year 2024, which is why we did not request funding in the current year. So again, that's where that system is at. It's not of any less importance. We just didn't need any added resource in the 23 budget. I think a couple other status updates to do with an information system in child support that I think you also heard about from my child support team. Again, that project, which you helped to fund last year, is scheduled to be complete in fiscal year 2023. About 3/4 of that supported through federal dollars. And then all the work that we continue to do on recruitment and retention. So, not just for our protection specialists, but, I mean, you can't have a meeting without talking about workforce, right? We talked about it with my state hospitals. I'm talking about with child protection staff. But we're working hard across our agency to find ways to support and attract our workforce. Continuing to focus on internships, paying for license fee renewals. We did recently put in a request for Spark funding for some other parts of our state employees and also for grantee staff. For, the governor may have recommended funding within our budget for our protective service workers, but certainly those partners at those case management agencies, at those child placing agencies, they also have challenges, and we did put in a request recently to Spark to the new advisory committees related to their teams as well. Lastly, just again, a couple more status updates. We did not need to request additional funding for adoption support this year. We did receive an enhancement request last year, continue to disperse that funding. I did want to give you an update on our family crisis response and support, youth mobile crisis. You funded $3 million enhancement in fiscal year 22 to enhance family crisis services for children and adults aged 0 to 20, not just kids in the foster care system, but all kids in Kansas, all youth in Kansas, all families in crisis. We entered into a contract that started October 1st with Beacon Health Systems. So as we sit here today, there is an 800 number that is a crisis line for families and youth in crisis that may, depending upon the circumstance, could lead to it may get resolved through conversations over the telephone, or it could mean that there needs to be a mobile response from a community mental health center partner, sometimes as quickly as 60 minutes. So again, it's a phased response, really, really valuable, really, really important. Again, it's just been in effect since October, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And KDAD's also received some funding last year related to mobile crisis for adults. So you'll hear more about that when you hear the KDAD's budget in terms of how we'll build on the DCF initiative in terms of mobile crisis for all populations across the state. Page 56, also a status update on funding you provided last year. You put $300,000 into the DCF budget for Hope Ranch related to a pilot program related to human trafficking. And this was really to serve adult survivors. I think we submitted at least an initial report based on a proviso that you had adopted a couple weeks ago to the chairman and to this committee. So we've got some basic data here. I feel like it's a little bit early to know much more than this data, and to be perfectly honest. We really just have kind of a partial year status report at this point on their efforts. So we'll be continuing to work with them to continue to collect that outcome data. The other initiative that you funded last year on a pilot basis was called the CAN Drive program. I'm sorry Representative Kincannon isn't here. This was, I think she really championed this. This was a pilot project modeled after a program in Florida that pays for driver's education and vehicle costs for youth who are in foster care. It really designed to offset some of those costs that might be incidental to getting a license and really support the ability for employment. You funded 50,000 SGF. We were able to use some federal dollars as well. We're piloting this in 24 counties in the state. We've used DECA as a contractor to manage the program for us. It has been wildly popular. In fact, so much so that we added some internal resources. We basically doubled the resources up to 500,000 in one-time funds for the pilot program this year with some one-time funding that we had. So again, very desired program, very well utilized as we begin that program. So I think with that, I can stop for questions, Mr. Chairman. I've probably gone on more than long enough.
Well, committee, as you may have realized, this is a big ship. So anyway, committee questions. Representative Ballard.
I'm going to start with the last thing you just said, the program we did with Can Drive.
Mhm.
And I think we approved it for like 50,000.
State General Fund, that's right. And we had a little bit of our own kind of our Chafee dollars for older youth that we were able to put 200,000. That was what we brought to you last year. We said we had 200,000. You provided 50,000. Yeah, 250 altogether. And then we kind of doubled it internally, at least for 1 year, with some one-time funding. Yeah.
I have a question about the child support.
Okay.
That's where I still get lots of questions. They're not complaints like we used to get, but lots of questions with child support. Now, we have Maximus and, was it Young?
Young Williams.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So we have those two agencies that are collecting the child care. The question that was posed to me is, when we determine, or the courts determine what amount the custodial parent will receive, and then we take part of the money, or the agency gets part of the money. I had trouble trying to explain how we left a little bit, but then they said, well, the little bit we take, is it out of the amount they're supposed to get, or do we add that amount and take it out?
You know, I have to be careful I don't get this wrong, and I may have to bring something back for you in writing, because you're right, this is very complicated. Where we talk about taking the funding or not providing the funding really has to do with, for example, folks who are in the TANF program where we're enforcing the child support. I think that's where most of the questions come from, and I think the advocacy sometimes. There are states that pass those dollars through. Our program, if you look in our budget, you won't see a state general fund dollar going towards that program. And so so we receive federal dollars for that, and then we offset it with some of those offsets, like for the TANF program. We did stop taking some of the fees that took place a number of years ago. But for certain populations where you would think about it as like recouping expenses, like for public assistance, those sorts of things, you do see offsets. And I'd be happy to like maybe provide a one sheet that would just show that very clearly to you, Representative.
I would appreciate it, because
Yeah.
I know it's complicated, but I think their big concern was if a custodial parent is to get, just for even numbers, 200, and say we take $10 out of it, do we charge the custodial parent 210? Or do we go 200, we subtract the 10, so therefore the custodial parent gets less? So
and we don't manage that the same way that we used to. So some of that may not be the same information. And also, if the case is managed through a court trustee, it may function differently, and there may be a different fee. So I think sometimes the devil can be in the detail too, in terms of who's managing the case. So let me put it all on one piece of paper, if that'll work for you, Representative, and that would be great.
thank you so much. Good.
Any further questions? Representative Clifford.
Yeah, and Families First, you were ahead of the feds on rolling that out, and now they've said some of your programs don't meet their participation criteria. Are they clawing back funds then, or they're waiving?
Yeah, they're not clawing back funds. They're just not willing to Let me back up for just a minute. So we started the program the first day the federal government said states could start it. At that point in time, they had not identified very many programs yet to be on the federal clearinghouse of evidence-based programs. So states kind of had to guess a bit what might end up there based on some other clearinghouses. Initially, some of those matches were waived. So, and then that went away. So it's not about any funding being clawed back. It's about that some of our services, we have to fund 100% with general fund because they're not going to match it. So we didn't have to like send money back. Yeah.
Follow-up, page 16 and then repeat in 34, childcare. Are those subsidies mainly going directly to families, or are they going to facilities, or is there a mixed subsidy?
So for childcare, we've always managed a childcare subsidy program for eligible families, which right now that income level would go up to 250% of the federal poverty level. And again, it's income based in terms of how much. Now, mechanically, how we've always managed that program is that the payment is made to the facility. But in terms of the federal pandemic dollars that have come in, the largest majority of those dollars have gone out to sustain, as what I think of as sustainability kinds of grants to sustain the childcare sector. So again, grants to everything from family-based settings to large center settings. Again, small amounts in any stage. But by the time you add up all of those, you get to a lot of resources that are going out there initially to help them, buy the sorts of things you needed to manage COVID. All those initial costs. Sometimes maybe some changes to their building to have better ventilation, whatever those things might look like. But so if we look at kind of those resources, out of that $500 and some million, we've sent out about $100 million so far in those sustainability grants in 2 different rounds. We have a 3rd round planned, again, starting in March. We estimate about $150 million will go out. And again, these will be paid in monthly payments. And again, for example, like a capacity of 24 or less children, they would get $3,600 per month as a sustainability payment, over a several month period. So again, a lot of different programs and facets. Also some quality pieces on the Hero Relief side. The program designed to increase access to child care assistance. It increased the income limit and really tried to target essential workers. We have expended close to $10 million there, expect to spend about another $6 million. So again, large variety of programs, quality, direct support to providers. But to answer your question, most of it has gone out to the network as opposed to the individual families to keep the sector operating. Yeah.
Thank you, Secretary Howard. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can you get that out to us, please?
Yes.
Child care portion.
Yes.
Representative Ruiz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Howard, on the Can Drive pilot program, when is that set to end?
It would end at the end of this fiscal year. Yeah. Well, actually, let me ask my budget staff if it's in the budget for next year.
It's in the base.
Okay, that amount is in the base, so we could continue it at the current level. We'd not be able to expand it. I'd had to check myself. So it was a pilot, but it was kept within the base budget. So we wouldn't be able to expand it beyond where it is today, but we could continue it. So obviously new youth could come in. But as I said, right now we're doing it in 24 counties in the sort of the eastern part of the state, our east region, kind of north and south of Topeka. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, further questions? Representative Ballard.
Just a clarification, will you be funding at the same rate? I mean, the 250, or if we're going to maintain it because it was a pilot, but will we maintain it at that level or less?
I think we would maintain it at the 250,000, but don't necessarily have the ability to have doubled it as we did in the current year. So that net effect would be a reduction, but not from what you intended. So we just were able to put a few more resources in the current year based on the demand. And we'd have to, limit the number of participants. If the number's is high, I think it's hard to know if there was maybe a little bit of a pent-up demand there.
Is there some way we can indicate in the budget that it doesn't look as if it was a reduction? Because often when we look at the budget, people say, oh, you're not funding it what you were before. We were at a certain level to begin with, and we had, quote, extra money. We put it into it, but it was never in the base.
That's correct. The additional funding was never in the base. That's right. Yeah.
We have to make sure that we show that in the budget so it doesn't look like it was a decrease. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do. I totally do. We will try to make sure we articulate that well, Representative. So, yeah.
Saving a little grief, saving me up. Okay, thank you.
I have a few. Slide 27, Representative Clifford talked about that. So how far off are they from the federal criteria that we require for Families First? That we're funding all off of SGF? These.
Oh, on the Family First, yes. It's hard to say how far off are they on the criteria. The federal government just has not identified them as meeting their whatever they call their strongly supported programs. I mean, in a couple cases, they still haven't ranked them, so we don't know. In at least one case, it's like one level below, and it's on other clearinghouses, like the ABC program is on, the California clearinghouse. It's on other clearinghouses, but it didn't make the federal one yet. So.
RTPs and stuff like that?
No. Oh, no, these aren't the facilities. These aren't the facilities. These are the grant-funded programs that we're supporting. So these could be the parent skill building programs going into the home. These aren't the facilities at all. These are the programs that are supporting the families directly in the community. Some parent skill building, some specialized mental health programs that haven't met the criteria, even though they're widely supported. For example, the mental health programs, they're like on SAMHSA clearinghouses as effective programs, but they didn't make the clearinghouse program, like multisystemic therapy, family functional therapy, which are also two programs that Juvenile Services here in Kansas funds through our evidence-based fund in Kansas. So again, very I can't tell you why they're not on there. At least one is like one level less. Some of them haven't been evaluated yet.
I thought they were providers.
No, these were, they're not the facilities, Representative. I apologize for any confusion there.
Okay, 37, slide 37. Let's go down here, take a look at 37. Foster care caseload. So the foster care caseload has went down. The expenditures are up significantly. Is that why they went down? You see your bar there where it shows the expenditures are up significantly, but the caseloads have went down?
The caseloads have gone down, again, I think due to the things that we've talked about, the Family First, the efforts at the front end to look for alternatives to foster care. We are seeing the cost per child go up. Now, part of that are rates that were built into the contracts, and part of that is the level of need of youth who are coming into the system. Because, we have scale payments, across both our residential and our family-based care. So we have, again, the, rate increases within our grants, and higher level of need for the youth.
So that's why the expenses went down or up
That's why the expenses went down, although the caseload went down. You can see the cost per child has gone up while the total caseload has gone down. Yeah.
Okay, down to 39. Childcare assistant caseload, same thing. So the cost has gone up. We're serving less people.
No, on the child care assistance case, so if you look at the line, we are actually starting to grow child care since fiscal year 2019. You see the monthly children going up from about 8,800 back up to just over 10,000 and to a projected 12,600 in fiscal year 23. And then you see some increases in the monthly cost per child. I talked about that rates were increased to the 85th percentile of cost. So what you have here is a combination of increases in the caseload and increases in the monthly cost based on the rates that we're paying, Representative.
Representative Howerton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the child care assistance, why is that going up? Exactly? There's more children, or is it through foster care and foster parents are working and we're paying child care, or?
Well, we did begin to pay foster care, child care through our child care assistants, but that's been a couple years. What you see now is you see the numbers going up, Representative. I mean, one, I think initially, with some of the pandemic and the economic downturn, but then we raised our income eligibility to 250% of the federal poverty level, up from 185% during the pandemic as part of our Hero Relief Program, really trying to target essential workers. So really, the eligibility change is probably having, so more people would qualify to receive this subsidy. And again, how much they receive, though, is tied to their income. So, yeah.
Page 49, Adrian's Law. Have you asked for any money in the budget for Adrian's Law?
No, not for DCF. I mean, as the bill is written, what the bill would do is DCF would make referrals for a scan or for a pediatric physician to at least look at the records. The bill is written for that program to be managed through Health and Environment as the agency with expertise around health and developing a provider network of qualified professionals. So I think what you would see in the fiscal note would be a funding request from KDHE.
Well, I know you were looking at a pilot program to start that in the Kansas City area. It was, I think I saw the fiscal note was 300,000, something like that.
Yeah, we did we're doing a pilot program right now in the KC metro area. I think spending about 50,000 on that program. I just asked about that today, in fact. I think spending about 50,000 on that for that pilot program. Again, it's been a pretty small program just to kind of test the impact of doing this kind of an effort. So, yeah, again, just for the pilot. And I'll double check. If that amount's wrong, I'll let you know. I think that's right, though.
I thought it was in the neighborhood of 300,000.
I'll double check.
So 50, the RFP on the Child Welfare Information Service. I think there's a bill going to be probably finalized here shortly. You may take a look at that before you issue the RFP to make sure that that will meet the criteria for that bill. I think we're trying to tighten that down, when you go out for RFP, so it's equitable. How's that?
You have me curious now, so
Yeah,
we'll take
you
a
should
look.
check that
We'll
out.
take a look at the.
But I
at
did hear
legislation.
when I was at a conference, Benty, great program. There's a bunch of good programs out there. And I guess you guys have also been having interviews with the various other program providers.
Yeah, my team's been doing, you get a chance before you do the RFP to have folks come in and do demos, so you get a better understanding of what's out there. Obviously helps, I think, then to craft what you're actually asking for by having a little bit more knowledge. Yeah, Bentig was in actually during the interim, and I think we had a chance to visit and talk with them. And like I said, there's probably 5 or 6 vendors that are probably most well-known across the country. But,
And I think
yeah.
what I think from that bill is the fact that when you interview folks like that and you see their program, then sometimes you can write the RFP to benefit that program for that company too. And I think that's part of the reasoning why I issue caution on that, because, even if you like that program, it still has to go out to a fair bid.
I totally agree with that, Representative. I think that it's really critical that things be written in such a way that all eligible vendors can apply. So,
Sure.
yeah. I mean, there's certain federal standards we have to meet, but once you get beyond that, you sort of get into the, sometimes you can put some things in an RFP as maybe options, those kinds of things. I like to think about it as what do you have to have, and then what might be nice, So, and I'm kind of a little bit focused on the what do you have to have. I think that's what's most critical for us, just to get out of these old systems, so.
And I understand 100%. Unfortunately, this isn't the private sector. That's exactly what I would do if I was looking for a program for my business. Was I would find the best one that I liked, but I wouldn't have to worry about it because it wasn't
Yeah, we don't quite get to
people's
do
money.
that, so, plus, really have to be responsible with taxpayer dollars, and also, I've been around long enough to know that what someone comes and shows you isn't necessarily what they can really do, so I've been through enough IT procurements in my career.
How many do you think we've bid on?
No, I don't even know. There was a point I had like Medicaid stuff under me many years ago, so I think I went through one of those MMIS re-procurements. That might have just been the death of me, so.
The only thing about being around long enough is sometimes you get to live long enough to see that you get rid of them.
That's true, that's true.
And there's been some of them that
That is true.
I have, and I know we've had conversations along that line. Last one, Hope Ranch. So I understand, so how is their funding stream, how have they been, how have they accessed their grant? How much money have they got from Department of Children and Families for the grant? And when was that allocated, Adam? I saw their report. It was only expenditures. There were no revenues on that. So
I can get you the details of what went out month by month. My recollection is, Representative, it was probably about 3 months into the fiscal year before we had an agreement to be able to get that out to them. Just like any other grant, they agreed to certain outcomes. You saw that in their report. They, kind of designed a program and told us what they thought the cost would be. And they basically, like all of those kinds of grantees, they report those costs. We make monthly payments to them. I'd be happy to give you sort of a listing so you could sort of see that revenue side that it sounds like you're missing.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I looked at the proviso again. I didn't see anything about monthly in there either, about monthly reports or monthly funding.
That's standard procedure under the state's procurement in terms of how we manage grants. I can talk more with you about that, Roseanne, if you'd like, so.
I'd certainly like
Yeah.
to visit with you.
Yeah, we're certainly not, I don't want you to think, we're certainly not singling them out for anything different than any other provider that we provide grant funding to. So, from an accountability perspective, but I'm happy to talk more with you about that.
I certainly know that they didn't receive any funding for 3 months after the fiscal year, right?
Yeah, that's why I said I think it was about 3 months. And then we were allowing them to make that up, in the sense of, well, I mean, I'll show you that on the revenue sheets as we provide that.
Okay.
So-
Very good. Committee, further questions? Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
And answering all of our questions. We
Thank
do
you.
have a few informational things that you'll get back to the committee.
Yeah, we sure will.
Okay.
Very good.
Any
Thank you.
further questions? All right, thank you again. We're adjourned.